Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know a few more people are trickling in, but we're going to get the show on the road. So welcome to the Grant Management Workshop for the Co-op Grant Community Outdoor Outreach Program. We're going to be going over all of the logistics you need to know for the grant today. And I first want to say congratulations to all of you. You have officially received a co-op grant. We had the largest grant award in co-op's history this year, right in time to celebrate the State Park Centennial Program. So we were able to award 55 organizations and just under $3 million. So congratulations, and we really look forward to partnering with you over the next 18 months. For a few housekeeping things, this presentation will be recorded, so if you have to leave early or if there's somebody in your organization who could not attend today, this will be recorded and available probably sometime next week in the resources section of our Recreation Grants online system, so you can view that at any time. The presentation will review the programmatic and fiscal requirements to effectively manage your co-op grant. The first half of the training is going to be about all the system stuff. So Recreation Grants Online, we call it ARGO, what that is, the grant agreement and related requirements, amendments, budget, reporting requirements. Then we'll take a 10-minute break, and then our audit team will pick up and review all the fiscal requirements and how to submit a payment request. If you have any questions, please use the questions link in the GoToWebinar. Everybody will be muted, so we will not be able to hear you. So if you have questions at any time, you can go ahead and type your question in there, and then we have somebody who is answering those questions in the system. And if there's questions that a lot of people have, we'll go ahead and address those questions. If not, we'll also have a Q&A at the end of the presentation where we can answer everybody's questions all at once. So go ahead and use that tab. You'll also find a few resources located in the handout section of GoToWebinar. We have three different resources for you today. These are also found in the resources section of ARGO, which we'll go over what that means. But we have our co-op program guidance, a PDF of this presentation, so you don't have to vigorously write down all your notes. We do have a PDF of the full presentation here. And then an approved TPWD resources document, which we'll go over later as well. So with that note, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, if you have any questions at all, feel free to just put them in the question box and we'll address those as we go along. So I first want to introduce our co-op staff. It's a small team, a two-person team. My name is Carly Blankenship, and I'm the co-op grants manager. I've been with the program about 6 or 7 years now, and I'm looking forward to working with each and every one of you. That's my favorite part of the job. So I'm the co-op grants manager, and then we also have Jessica Lagallo, who's the co-op grants coordinator. Jessica, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, grantees. My name is Jessica Lagallo. I joined Texas Parks and Wildlife with Outdoor Education and Outreach back in 2016. And I've been with the co-op team for about 2 years. A little bit about me. My career, I did a 9-year stint as a public school teacher, middle school science. And prior to that, I worked a lot of seasonal outdoor ed positions with the Park Service, with summer camps, with nonprofits, and so I can definitely relate to many of your grant-funded programs, and I hope that I can be a resource as you navigate your way through co-op grant.
Absolutely, thank you. And Jessica and I both have a lot of experience doing both programs and grants, so we understand where a lot of the program people are coming from, so we can definitely help you out along the way. All right, well, we're just going to go ahead and jump right in here. So I wanted to introduce you to our Recreation Grants Online system. We often refer to it as ARGO. So if you ever see ARGO, that's what we're talking about. So the first question is, how do you access the system? When you apply to the grant, you hopefully already accessed the system because you had to submit through our online system for the grant. But if you just Google TPWD Co-op, we are usually the first thing that pops up for you. So you can go ahead and click on that link and it'll bring you to the page that you see here. To access the Argo system, you can then apply on that Apply Manage link, and it will bring you to another page that will have the link to the Argo system. And we do everything within that system. It's what we use to submit quarterly reports, to submit payment reports, to communicate with you. You can view all of your application documents in the system. So that's the master thing that we use to communicate with you and to store documents. Also on our webpage, I wanted to point out that you can see the news media link at the bottom, and that's where we store all of the press releases for our entire Recreation Grants team, but our 2023 Co-op Awards press releases there. And in that press release, we list all 55 organizations who got a grant and a little paragraph blurb about each and every one of them. So if you're curious to see what other groups got a grant, you can go ahead and check out that press release right there. I also wanted to point out the Argo resources. And like I said, we're going to be referencing the Argo resources quite a bit because that's where a lot of the documents are held. So all the handouts that we have provided to you in this presentation, plus many other resources like training videos or payment request instructions, quick start user guides, that all can be found in the resources section of Argo. So once you logged in, you don't even need to be logged in for this. In the top right-hand corner, there's a link that says Argo 2020 resources. That's how you get to this page. And when you see that, you'll have a few different options there. We have several different grant programs within Recreation Grants. We are the Co-op grant program. So if you are looking for very program-specific documents like our program guidance, our approved TPWD resources, or some maybe templates specific to the co-op program, you can find those in the Co-op grant program resources link there. And then if you scroll down and you're looking for information on instructions, how to sign a grant agreement or how to submit a payment request, how to submit a quarterly report, those can all be found in the Awarded Active Project Resources link. And then we also have a quick start user guide section, which goes through all the very basic things, which many of you have already done. But there are instructions in that link on how to add users or remove users from your account if you've had some turnover or some new people that you want to have access to the system. Those are instructions on how to do that. All right, first up, so how do you access your grant application and all of those forms in the system? Once you're fully logged in, you'll see an applications link at the top. You want to first click that link. And then you'll have all of these different options like applications type, applications name, person. This is very important and often a place where people kind of mess up and put too many things in there and then nothing shows up. We highly recommend that you leave all of these sections blank and then hit the search button. And any application related to your organization will appear. Sometimes you'll see one that says application withdrawn. Sometimes people accidentally put multiple applications in there. They didn't realize they started multiple ones. So you'll want to make sure to choose the application when you do a blank search, the one that says the Co-op grant program in 2023, and it'll usually say active project unless you're in some sort of different status. The last thing I want to point out here is that you'll want to click the link under the name column, not the organization column. If you click the link in the organization column, it'll bring you to the information about your organization rather than the information about your application itself. So you want to make sure to click on the link under the name column. All right, and with that, we're going to go ahead and pass it over to Jessica, who's going to walk you through the actual grant agreement and program expectations.
All right, we're going to be changing chairs here. Hold on just a second.
All right, hello again, grantees. This is Jessica. I'm going to be walking you through this first section to provide an overview of the programmatic details relating to your co-op grant. So we're going to talk about the grant agreement, We're going to talk a little bit about reporting requirements, and then we're also going to talk about grant compliance. And for those of you who have been awarded co-op funds before, we know you're probably pros by now, but there's still changes from year to year, and there's always a few good tidbits, and it's always a great refresher too. So as Carly mentioned, the second portion of today's workshop will provide more information related to the fiscal expectations of your grant. So if you're only managing the fiscal aspects of the grant, you're free to join us for just part 2 with our audit team, or you can continue to hang out with us. Okay, so most of you are already familiar with the grant agreement. Your grant agreement is used to outline your specific scope of work for your organization. So to access your grant agreement, you'll click on the applications link, and this is in the top left-hand corner of your screen, and you'll find your current grant project. So once you click on that project, this main screen will appear, and you'll see your application documents, and you'll also see your grant agreement. If you click on agreement signatures, that link is near the bottom. If you haven't uploaded your direct deposit or your AP 152 form, you'll need to complete that step before we can actually prepare your grant agreement. The direct deposit is optional. If you prefer to be paid by check, that's fine too, although sometimes this can increase the time it takes to receive your funds. All right, let's take a look at the grant agreement. This page will include a link to your signed grant agreement near the bottom, and some of you are already at this step and some of you are pretty darn close. We're going to review that in just a moment, as well as some of the attachments that were included. So the attachments included would be your approved budget. It would be our local use agreement, our co-op program guidance, and the assurances for state-funded awards. It may be helpful to have a printed copy or even save it on your desktop of your agreement and of your approved budget saved for reference. So if you clicked that link, you would find the finalized grant agreement signed by us and by you. And this is the legal document that we use to outline the project scope and the requirements of your grant. So at the top, you'll find that basic information of the grant, your project number, your project name, the period of performance, and your total grant amount. The period of performance outlines when all eligible grant actions may take place. It's important to note that all purchases and activities must fall within this range. So if you purchase some kayaks on February 28th, we are very sorry, but your grant period starts March 1st. So we can't reimburse for anything before the beginning of your performance period. The state share is the total amount of grant funds awarded to your agency, and you can't request additional funds over this amount. So we kind of had one pot of money, we awarded that much money, and so your grant amount will not increase over the 18 months. So if you look at section 1, this is the primary scope of work, like the description of your project, as well as the performance goals that we'll use to determine if deliverables were met throughout the grant. So you'll be required to submit quarterly reports to document your progress on each goal, as well as participant demographics. And then section 2 outlines any special conditions, such as if you had some things in your budget that were maybe disallowed, we went ahead and took those out. So be sure and check your approved budget to see if there were any special conditions in there. So the rest of the agreement outlines all the legal requirements for accepting the grant award. And we're going to take a deeper dive into some of these other elements. Okay, period of performance, you have 18 months and your co-op grant started March 1st. So each co-op grant has a period of performance that runs for 18 months, from March 1st of this year to September 1st of 2024. Now, we know occasionally the universe can waylay the very best of plans, and we do make allowances for extensions due to circumstances such as weather, most recently COVID incidents and surges, but the maximum extension that we can grant you is 6 months. So sometimes it's just a request, maybe you just need another month or two for an event that was canceled, or you can take up to 6 months if it's needed. Most of those types of situations would require an amendment to your grant agreement, and we're going to look at those in just a moment. Just keep in mind that if you're changing your site or your venue, so if you said in your grant application you were going to visit Garner State Park, and it turns out that it's more convenient or they're all booked up and instead you're going to go to Colorado Bend State Park, that does not negate your grant agreement. It doesn't require an amendment. You can talk to Carly and I about that, but it's not something that's going to affect your goals or your period of performance. All right, performance goals. These are the SMART goals that you wrote in your application. So the performance goals will be listed in your quarterly reports as well, and you'll describe specific progress throughout your period of performance based on these goals. So again, for most of you, these goals were taken directly from your application. There were a few of you, we worked with you a little bit to revise the goals to align better in that SMART goal format. This section is kind of a summary of your scope of work, but we still hold you accountable for what is actually written in your application, and that's referenced in your grant agreement. And you are expected to implement the project as you proposed it in your application. So co-op grants are very competitive. We do have a review committee that scored your application, and points were awarded to your organization based on your grant agreement requirements. So if you can't deliver the proposed aspects that were outlined in the agreement, you may not have received the number of points during that review process. So if you're not completing the project as you proposed, or if you're not meeting the demographics, the audience that you had listed, you may not meet the grant, terms of the grant. So if it's a small change, like I said, visiting a different park, it's not a problem. But if the core aspects of your application are missing, you may be considered non-compliant. And that's something that both Carly and I would definitely need to chat with you about a little more. So what is an unduplicated participant? The number of unduplicated participants served and their demographics are outlined, and that's derived directly from your application as well. You provided us with a total number of participants that you would serve. Unduplicated participants are the actual number of individual participants served, meaning if you run a program where youth are attending multiple events, they're only counted once as unduplicated. Now, you'll list those other events and dates and things like that in other sections of your report, but when you're reporting your number of participants, it's an unduplicated participant count. The reason we do this, really the primary objective of this grant program, is to diversify audiences that are engaged with Texas Parks and Wildlife, with our mission and activities. And the participant demographics are really key in determining if we are meeting our mission of our grant. So If you listed less than 40% for a particular demographic, you don't really need to track or report that demographic. It's only in the demographics you listed as being 50% or higher. So if you said that 90% of your audience would be female, then it's really important that you track and report on that demographic. If you had said only 10% of all your participants would have a disability, you're not required to track and report that demographic. So it's important to note that you must have a means of collecting and reporting this data for the actual participants served. You shouldn't be using rough estimates. For instance, if you coordinate an after-school program and the estimated demographics provided in your application used the school's data where students are recruited from, you need to report on the actual demographics of your participants. They may not necessarily match the exact school's overall demographics. So you're not just giving us the school's demographics, you're giving us the demographics you collected from the participants that you served. You're not required to submit that documentation. However, you need to maintain those records internally in case your project is ever audited. We love partnerships, and we have many of them where schools and nonprofits and other organizations that the co-op grant serves work together. We believe that they are crucial in administering really successful programs, but they can sometimes complicate certain aspects if projects are reporting the same activities as other co-op projects. So this really pertains to you if you are partnering with another co-op grant partner who received a grant in the same year or received a grant in the previous year. There are a few things that you need to know, some stipulations you need to follow. You may not provide financial resources derived from co-op grant dollars to a partnering organization that has an open grant. And that's really just to ensure that some organizations aren't receiving grant funds twice from the co-op grant. If you have questions about that or you're not really sure if any of your partners have received a co-op grant, Carly earlier pointed out our media section in our news release, and you'll find a full list of all of our grant recipients. And of course, you can always just ask Carly and I, and we can find that out for you. All right, EPWD relationship planning tips. The intent of the grant, again, is to really diversify the audiences that are interacting with Texas Parks and Wildlife sites, with programs, with resources. It is a required element of the grant. And I just really want to encourage you all to plan early. As you probably know, the capacity of our parks and our sites are based on visitor safety, are based on resources. And the last several years, many of our parks are reaching capacity, not just for campsites, but also for day passes. You can make a reservation up to a year in advance. I would say, if you're trying to make a reservation today at a really popular park, again, I'll use Garner as an example. It's one of our really busy parks. If you tried to call today to reserve a campsite on a weekend at Garner State Park, even 2 or 3 months from now, I would say you might have a very challenging time trying to get a reservation. One thing that can help you, and I really encourage, a lot of people are not aware that we do have dedicated group sites and facilities that are only for youth or nonprofit groups. Those are not on our online reservation site. Those can only be reserved by calling our group reservation number, and that should help out a lot of you. We do have an online booking system. It's called the Reserve America system. You can book group campsites and some facilities, but things like the group lodges cannot be booked online. Again, the dedicated group sites and those types of facilities for youth groups and nonprofits, you will actually need to call the group reservation line. So a few other reminders. I'll be honest, I think our main website is a little difficult to navigate, but new for this year and attached to this workshop, we have a Texas Parks and Wildlife relationship document, and that includes contact information and clickable links for many of our agency programs. So we put it all in one spot for you. It's attached to this workshop as a handout, so be sure and download a copy for easy reference. A couple of things that you'll find on there, you can find a full list of accessible facilities, campsites, and trails at state parks, as well as contact information for our American Disability team, ADA team. You can also use the Texas Parks and Wildlife event calendar to help you find free park programs during your visit, or you can find scheduled trainings that many of you need for your project, such as Project Wild or Texas Aquatic Science, hunter education, angler education. Again, that document attached to this workshop provides you with registration links. It provides you with contact information. One last note that the reservations for Texas Outdoor Family, if that's a program that you're planning to use for spring campouts, that's actually started February 1st, and they open up fall campouts July 1st. So these programs have very limited availability, so be sure and sign up on their website for those dates and those updates. So if you need more help with any type of resources or programs or parks, please call us. Carly and I are very familiar with many of the Texas Parks and Wildlife sites. We've been to many of these parks. We've been through many of these programs, and we can help connect you to a variety of resources. So now I'm going to pass it over to Carly to tell you a little bit more about regulations.
All right, hello again, everyone. So now I'm going to talk about the different regulations. Unfortunately, this is a government grant, so it comes with a little bit more red tape. So unlike foundations and other private funding resources, government grant dollars originate from community tax dollars. Specifically for co-op, our funds are derived from a portion of sporting goods sales tax. So that's where the money comes from for this particular program. This includes tax on different supplies related to outdoor recreation like camping, hunting gear, fishing gear, kayaks. All of that comes back to our program. A portion of that comes back and supports the co-op program. Therefore, Texas Parks and Wildlife must follow government regulations when administering grant funds to the community. So there's a few different things that we need to follow. First up, we have Texas Grant Management Standards. This is a set of financial management procedures and definitions that state agencies have to follow when awarding grant dollars. Texas Grant Management Standards is operated by the Texas Comptroller. So if you're familiar with federal grants, this is Texas' version of 2 CFR 200. And you can actually Google that on the Texas Comptroller site if you actually want to look at the Texas Grant Management Standards. Next up, co-op was created back in 1996 by the Texas legislature and was identified in Chapter 24 of the Parks and Wildlife Code. So Chapter 24 is our guiding statute dictating the program's purpose and intent. Luckily, you don't need to know any of the specifics of these statutes. There's a lot of dry information in there. So for the co-op program, we've created a program guidance document for all of the grant recipients, which outlines the expectations and requirements specific to applying for and managing a co-op grant. That document is found in the handout section of this webinar, as well as the resources section in Argo. Much of the materials covered today will be found in this co-op program guidance. Excuse me. All right, so I'm going to bring you back to the grant agreement here where you can access that and see all of your different attachments. A reminder, we have all the attachments listed here. If you go under the agreement signature page, you'll find all of those. Sorry, excuse me. When you signed your grant agreement, these attachments are all agreed upon reference. So they are part of the grant agreement document, even though you didn't sign each individual document, you did agree upon these upon reference. And an overview of what attachments these are, we have the logo use agreement. Using our logo is not required for your program, but you're welcome to use it on your brochures, clothing, water bottles, websites, newsletter, flyers, and any other materials you have for your program. Keep in mind that you must use the Proud Partner logo, not the general Texas Parks and Wildlife logo, as seen in the upper left-hand corner of the slide. You can find multiple versions of the Proud Partner logo in the Co-op Resources section of Argo. If using the logo, please keep in mind that you need to send a draft copy of the material design to either Jessica or myself for approval before it's printed. We're very quick on that. We'll give you a response the same day or next day, but just make sure to get those approved so that we can make sure you're not modifying the logo or that you're using the correct Proud Partner logo. Like I mentioned earlier, the co-op program guidance is part of the attachments as well, and that outlines the expectations and requirements specific to applying for and managing a co-op grant. Everything we covered today can be found in that document. And then last up, we have the assurances for state-funded grants, which are the state of Texas's legal assurances required. And then the last attachment that we have on that section is the approved budget. The approved budget is part of your grant agreement and is the guiding document for receiving payment on your eligible activities and expenses. So to access your approved budget, find the current project application like we showed before, and then you go down and click on the project budget details. When you click on this link, depending on how many line items you have, it can take a little while to load. So just be patient with it. It might take a minute or so to load. If you have like 50 or 60 items listed on your budget, it can just take a little while. Depending on how many items are listed, again, just take a while. Whenever we look at payments and everything, we always refer to the approved budget. And when you click on the link, this is what your approved budget will look like. It's important to note that not all items have been approved, so only the items with amounts listed in the approved TPWD costs, which is shown in this arrow, will be allowable for payment. Some items may have been disallowed from your proposed budget, so review the section very carefully. It doesn't happen very often, but occasionally we will remove a few if you included some ineligible items in here. We don't allow you to replace those ineligible items with actually approved ones. We just reduce the amount of your grant award. In addition, staff may have revised certain line items to make it easier down the road for our auditing staff. So if you listed individual items in great detail, so listed them all out individually, like climbing ropes, harnesses, carabiners, helmets, all of that individually, we may have consolidated those items into a simplified rock climbing supplies and related line item. We do this for your own benefit. This will greatly reduce the amount of budget revisions required later, because if you forgot batteries, or if you forgot, oh, I included all the ropes and harnesses, but I didn't include carabiners, this will be a catch-all for all of those rock climbing supplies or other, camping supplies and so on. So just keep in mind that we may have modified your budget slightly to make it a little bit more simpler. Next up, I wanted to go over, one last thing I wanted to show you is that there is a printer-friendly version of the budget, so that you can click on the print version in the top right-hand corner, and you will be able to print out your budget. The budget is also printed out. It's part of the attachments in your grant agreement, so that's another way to access it as well. All right. I'm not going to go through all of these individually, but I just wanted to review that here are the eligible and ineligible activities that are allowed through the co-op grant. These are all listed in the program guidance document. Some of the common disallowed activities include special events open to the general public, like festivals or Earth Day events, tournaments, and traditional sports such as baseball, soccer, football. So when we were going through a grant application, if we saw any of these in there, we actually disallowed these from your activities, and we most likely included this in the special conditions part of your grant agreement. So keep in mind that if you're adding on new activities or if you included these in your application, they're not allowed, and we did remove them from your budget. All right. Now I'm going to talk about amendments, and there are 3 different types of amendments that you may experience throughout the life of your grant. The first one is an amendment to extend the period of performance. Like Jessica said, you have the option to extend the grant for an additional 6 months if needed. Typically, these are for extenuating circumstances, like something may have happened in your grant, or maybe there was weather-related issues, like a hurricane came through and all the parks were closed, or COVID was a great example of all of that. But this extension is available. We'll follow up with you in the last few months of the grant to see if an extension is needed. Unfortunately, we can't extend longer than 6 months, as the funds do expire for our organization for, you have 2 years to complete the activity. So we can't go beyond that point. Keep in mind that if you receive an extension, you will not be eligible to reapply for grant funds in the following grant cycle, as you must close out all your grant funds in order to reapply for the program. The next type of amendment is changing the project scope. If you've had extenuating circumstances, like we said, COVID, hurricanes, anything like significant like that, not including like staff turnover, or you just didn't plan enough to have all of those ducks in a row. If you had any of those things like COVID or hurricanes that significantly impact your ability to complete the project as proposed, we may be able to work with you to amend your scope. Since our grants are scored competitively, you receive certain points for each element of your application. So these scope change elements are extremely rare. We don't allow these. We won't modify your goals, or we won't modify the scope of work a whole lot, just as these are extremely rare. So just keep that in mind. The last thing are budget revision requests. This is by far the most common type of amendment. It's the only amendment that does not require signatures from both parties. So if you want to purchase an item that is not listed on the approved budget, you can request a budget revision to add the item to your approved budget. Keep in mind that it's best practice to complete this budget revision before the item is purchased, as we may not approve the budget revision. So you can purchase it before you actually do the budget revision, but it's really recommended to do the budget revision before, just to confirm that it is an eligible expense. Budget revisions must be fully completed before you seek payment for that item. So you cannot seek a payment request for the item until you've done that budget revision. And we're going to go through that process right now. So a few tips to remember when requesting a budget amendment. So your total grant award will not increase. I wish we could give you more money, but we just can't. So be sure in your budget revision request to let us know which existing line items on the budget will be decreased to offset the cost of the new items you just added to the budget. If you're just moving funds from one existing line item to another existing line item, you do not need a budget revision. We understand that things happen a little bit differently than proposed, so you may need to spend a little bit more in your previously approved kayak budget and a little bit less in, let's say, your camping supplies. If those items were both listed on the approved budget and you're just moving money in between them, no budget revision is needed. If it's a significant change, like you're moving all of your funds to one item and it's like moving like $50,000 to one item, you may just want to run that by us first, because that's pretty significant. We usually don't disallow that, but we just may want to run that by us first, and we'll make a note on your budget so that they can know that. It's highly recommended to request budget revisions before the item is purchased. Like I said earlier, there's no guarantee the item will be approved, so just best practice, do it before. All right, so how do you do this in our Argo system? Again, like all of the other items, log in, find your current application, and then when you get to the current application, if you want to submit an amendment, go ahead and hover over that status change link near the top, and then you'll find a couple options. You'll want to choose the amendment revision request in process option. Please know, this is very important, that once you click that status, it does not automatically submit a request to us. It just gets you in the stage. It releases a new form for you to fill out so that you can fill that out and send that to us. It's also very important to know that you will not be able to submit a reimbursement or a payment request when you're in this amendment stage, as reimbursement requests go off a budget, and when you're in this stage, you're usually modifying the budget. So you have to fully complete the budget revision or amendment before you can submit that payment request. So once you status change this, a new link will appear near the bottom of the screen, and it shows as amendment revision request. Again, once you status change, it doesn't automatically send us anything. It just gives you access to this amendment revision request link. So you'll want to click on that link. And then once you do that, you'll get to this screen here. Check the box for whether you're requesting a scope change or budget item or extension. Again, scope changes are very rare, so you probably won't be doing that, and you want to talk to us before you request that anyway. But the most common is adding a budget line item. When you're entering this information regarding your amendment, make sure to include, if it's a budget revision, include which item or items you're adding to the approved budget, the dollar amounts for those items, and then which existing line items will be reduced to offset that cost. And then once you submit, we'll go in there and actually modify your budget live so that it's fully reflective of what you're requesting. If you're requesting a 6 month extension, all you need to do just here, like we have here, is say, in the describe your amendment request, just say extend for 6 months, give us a brief, couple sentence explanation of why you need that extension, and then we'll go ahead and process that as well. The last step that you want to really make sure you do is that once you've filled out this form, click the save button, make sure it fully saves, and then hover over the status change link in the top left-hand corner and choose submit for that status. At that point, then Jessica and myself are notified of your request. We will go ahead and complete whatever we need to do or follow up with you if we have any questions. And then you'll receive an email notification when that budget revision is processing and going through. So when you hit the status change button, if you don't get a confirmation email, please let us know. That probably means that it did not go through. I'm not going to go through each one of these non-allowable expenses. They are listed on page 11 of the program guidance document. You can only seek payment for items in the TPWD approved column of the approved budget. If there are items missing from the budget, you do have the option to request an amendment to revise those, as we just covered. But here's a list of the common disallowed items. A few common items include marketing materials, construction expenses. We do not do construction for this program. Prizes and certificates, and sales tax, and storage buildings. So just keep that in mind. Make sure to look at that. If you did have any of these on your budget, then we did remove them, but just keep in mind. So next up, I'm going to pass it over to Jessica, and she's going to go through the different reporting requirements for your grant.
All right, y'all are keeping us hopping on that live questions, which is great to see, actually. So if you do have questions come up, some of you were kind of responding to you privately about your specific grant issues, and sometimes we're just kind of sharing that information with everyone. So take a breath. We are almost done with the programmatic portion of our grant workshop. We're going to be taking a break in just a little bit. But before we break, I want to talk a little bit about reporting requirements. And this is really important because you do have a deadline coming up. So all reports are submitted in our Argo system. And your reports usually include a narrative that detail your progress made towards achieving your grant requirements. And you provide a list of all the activities that occurred in that reporting period. So this is also where you will report your total number of unduplicated participants that your project served and their demographics. The final report at the end of your performance period will be comprehensive for all the activities you've done over the 18 months, all the participants you've served, and the demographics that were supported during your period of performance. So through the life cycle of your grant, you'll be required to submit reports to both Carly and I with some updates, and the reports are required quarterly, no matter if you had participant activities or not. So I know that we have plenty of grants out there that perhaps don't start until October, right? Maybe it's some type of after school program and it's not going to start until the 23-24 school year. But you have a first quarterly report due on July 30th. You still need to submit that report and just let us know that you're still alive and kicking and you haven't done any programs yet, but you are ready to go for October. So again, even if you haven't started your activities, it's really important that we hear from you with the required report. Again, that comprehensive final report is due 45 days after the end of the grant period, and you'll get plenty of reminders about that. If you want to close early, we can also help you do that. So let's say your entire grant is for a summer camp this summer, and you're going to spend all of your grant dollars by September. If you want to close out early, we can certainly help you do that. So let's take a quick look at what your quarterly report will look like. They will be available on the first of the month prior to the due date. And in your account, they will appear in the My Task section of your main screen in the Argo system. So if you looked right now to try and find your quarterly report to fill out, it will not be there. It will only self-generate on the first of the month before the due date. So it automatically initiates that report for you in that My Task section. So for example, your very first quarterly report will be automatically created on July 1st, and that will be due on July 30th. And that's going to cover any activities that you had from April to June, okay? Now, even if you didn't have any activities, you're still going to submit that quarterly report. It should be super quick for you. So we are going to ask you several different questions. We will ask you how many participants you served and their demographics. We will ask you about any TPWD relationships that you had during those months, and that might be you visited the Sea Center, or you worked with a Texas Parks and Wildlife biologist, or some of your staff took Project Wild training. So please list those out. And then you'll also just provide us with a clear understanding of the events that you delivered. So if you look at the example in this slide, you'll enter your activities from your performance goals that were completed. And just know that in this section, you only need to include activities during the reporting quarter. So come January of next year, you don't need to list every single activity from March 1st till January. You're just reporting 1 quarter at a time. So you'll list the date, you'll list the type of activity, whether that's a service project or a summer camp, list the location, you'll list the number of participants served, and whatever activities that were included. So if you received a co-op grant in the past, this might look a little different. This part replaces that Excel activity spreadsheet that you uploaded with your quarterly reports. So luckily we don't have to use it anymore. It's all here in one place. So here is a really helpful tip for some of you. If you coordinate a program that hosts the exact same type of program with the exact same participants, like a after school program that meets every day, you don't need to include every day that participants meet. That would be a huge expectation. So instead, you can break it down weekly or monthly and then just include all the recreation activities and participants that you served during that week or during that month, rather than listing out every single day. But if you run a program that serves different participants with very different types of activities, so on Mondays and Tuesdays, you served elementary students and they were hiking, and on Thursdays and Fridays, you served the high school students who were doing a service project, you would need to report those separately, okay? So it's preferred if you break out those activities separately, and for questions on how your particular program should break out those activities, just ask Carly or I. Don't hesitate to ask us and we can help you figure that out in the most efficient way. As Carly said before, be sure and click that save button often as you complete your reports. It can time out. It's happened to me quite a bit. So just always be looking and clicking that save button if you haven't done so in a while. When you submit your quarterly report, we will review the information you've provided. If we need more information or if something isn't clear, we will reach out to you, usually from the Argo system, and ask some questions or ask if some data is missing. If it has been reviewed and accepted and it's all good, you'll receive an email confirmation that no further action is needed from you. And then you just wait for that next quarterly report to be auto-generated on the 1st of the month following the next reporting period. The number one mistake that we see in Argo, and I actually saw this several times yesterday, so there's kind of a learning curve here, it's forgetting to actually submit. It's called the status change. So don't forget, anytime you do that action in the Argo system, you need to status change it in order to submit it. So you may be filling out that report and you save it and you think you're good, but you still have to submit it. So don't forget to status change. Remember that you will receive an email verification that your report has been submitted. So if you don't see that email, that confirmation email that it was submitted, chances are pretty good that you forgot to status change and submit. And the last thing I'm just going to chat with you about is grant compliance. As we mentioned earlier, reporting will be compared to your grant agreement and your initial application to determine if all your requirements are being met, if you're making progress, if everything's going well. If you are awarded a grant, your organization is eligible to reapply for grant funds every 2 years, as long as an extension is not in progress. So if you request an extension, it's not possible because you can't have multiple co-op grants at the same time. You need to close out the co-op grant you have before you can be awarded another grant. If your grant requirements were not met, hopefully that wouldn't happen because you're working with Carly and I over the 18 months. Grant staff will notify you during that closeout process of any actions that are needed, That might include repayment of funds or a program audit, but most often it's a scoring deduction that is in place when you apply for future co-op grants. So scoring deductions just ensure fairness and accountability. It's a competitive grant program and it is paid with tax dollars. So be aware factors that trigger those future deductions would be not spending all your grant funds. If you leave a little bit of money on the table, that's not a huge problem, but just know that we don't receive that funding back. We can't award it the next year or to another person. It goes right back to the state. So we really encourage you to spend all your grant dollars. If you are unable to fulfill any of your project elements or grant agreement requirements, such as not serving a target audience that was listed in your application, or not completing certain aspects of the scope that you described, that would also result in future deductions. Also, if you're unresponsive as we request information or we're sending you multiple emails and phone calls, that non-communication can also result in future points deductions. If your reports are consistently missing or late or not complete, that can result in deductions. Of course, if you have something really urgent, just reach out to us. We might be able to grant you an extension or just let us know what's going on. So these types of deductions will be imposed on projects that are closed, and that will last for 2 years from the new application deadline. So that would make it pretty tough for you to keep receiving co-op grants. And I will say that of the 55 organizations that we awarded this year, I mean, many of you made that cut by just a point or two. So when we're talking about these deductions, they can be very significant in whether or not you're awarded a grant. All right, so it is now time for a very well-deserved break. Please feel free to submit questions. We are here live answering questions. We'll be responding to those during the break. We will also have a Q&A time dedicated at the end of the workshop today. So let's meet back here. It is 10:01, so we will meet back here at 10:11, and we will dive into the fiscal side of your grant. We'll see you at 10:11 a.m.
Hello and welcome back. I hope everybody's back with us. It's very nice to be with you. I'm a new presenter, Brian Lofgren. I'm the Rec Grants Fiscal Manager. We've gone over quite a bit of what we consider the program side. We've gone over the co-op program guidance, like mission, rules and regs of how and why we must do some of the things. We've done an introduction to driving or making inputs into Argo, and we talked about approved budget and reporting. And I hope something that you're hearing frequently is save and status change. Now we're going to move into what we consider more the fiscal portion and how our organization, how your organization receives the grant funds. We're going to cover what documents are required, like invoices or receipts and proof of payment, how to submit these payment requests in Argo, and some specifics to navigate tricky areas like personnel payments, maybe lodging, travel, and taxes, and time for questions and answers at the end. This part of the grant cycle involves our audit team. So I wanted to introduce you to our audit team who will be presenting to you today and working with you on your submissions. Michael Garza, Daryl Edgar, and Michael Stanford are our auditors. Mary Helen is our accountant. Our audit team lead is Marcy Cavazos Colunga, and I'm Brian Lofgren, Fiscal Manager. These functions of the audit team is to provide the integrity of our grant process by ensuring all expenditures and reimbursements are made according to the rules and regulations that we discussed earlier, especially the minutia of Texas Grant Management Standards and Chapter 24 of the Parks and Wildlife Code. On the audit team, we are all absolutely in tune with the mission of getting your organization this grant funding for you to do the wonderful programs that you do and make such a difference at. It would be far easier for us just to say yes to everything, to all requests and submissions, but the audit team must maintain a minimum floor of documentation and process across all of our rec grants, various programs, that will stand up to scrutiny when our grant process and management is audited from the state or from the feds, which is a regular built-in occurrence. So we're going to take care of a lot of that red tape and get back with you if anything needs follow-up. Well, to get back to the nuts and bolts of this presentation on what you're really interested in, let me turn it over to Michael Garza.
All right, good morning, everyone. This is Michael Garza. I'm going to give a brief overview as to the payment reimbursement process and kind of just give you some information about that. Just as a brief reminder, I was the guy in the green polo in the previous slide. And at some point, you'll probably talk to me or one of the other auditors, but more than likely, it'll be one of the three of us throughout the lifetime of your grant. So the payment types. This is the very starting point. This is what where I'll start to ease you guys in. So there's basically two types of payment types. There's the normal reimbursement type, which is the most common one and more likely the one you'll use more often. And then there's the advance payments, formerly known as seed payments. So as you know, this is a reimbursement type grant. So in order to receive payments through a normal reimbursement request, you must purchase the item first and then submit all the required backup documentation for that to justify the purchase. Once the documentation is approved, TPWD will send you payment either through direct deposit or paper check. You can submit as many reimbursement requests as needed. However, a pending reimbursement must be processed by our fiscal team before you can submit your next one. And then moving on to advances, it's essentially the same thing as a regular reimbursement request. It just works backwards. So instead of spending the money first, you receive the money up front, and then you spend the money, and then provide documentation to us as to how to justify what was spent. So when it's been approved from program, you can request the advance payment, and then we'll set it through our process so it can get processed and sent to accounts payable to get paid. And as I said, you'll submit the documentation after the fact, and I'll show you a brief live demonstration of that later in the presentation. And the advances themselves should not exceed the amount of expenses to be incurred within 3 months. So there's no specific dollar amount cap, as long as you can justify that you're submitting 3 months worth of expenses. And then all backup documentation must be received and approved for the all backup documentation must be received and approved for the documentation or for the funds that you requested for advance. But all that we ask is that you submit a little bit extra, just if there's any disallowed, if any items were disallowed for whatever reason, and that way we can satisfy the amount of the seed request or the advance request. And any applicable or allowable expenses that were over the seed request can be requested on your next reimbursement request. You just need to satisfy what you requested for the advance. And then the new thing about this year is that you can request multiple advances as needed, but you cannot submit your next advance until your previous one has been satisfied. If you can't spend the full amount of the advance, or you fail to provide backup documentation, those funds must be repaid, and any unused funds need to be sent back to TPWD. So a couple of reminders about these, because I know I kind of just threw a lot of information at y'all. All items requested for reimbursement must be on the approved budget, and they must be during the scope of the grant. Payments can take up to 30 days to process, with assuming that all the documentation has been received. If we need any additional information, this process can and will take longer. Make sure your email is up to date regularly, because all correspondence will be sent there, and that's something I will also show you in the brief live demonstration. And that's really important that you have the most current person or whoever is in charge of submitting your reimbursements to have the most current information, because any correspondence for additional info or any information about processing times will be sent there. Payments should be submitted on a regular basis. We normally like to say quarterly, but it's ultimately up to you. Ideally, TPWD would like to see activity throughout the life of the grant, so it'd be good to send reimbursements somewhat often. It doesn't have to be quarterly, but ideally it would be. And as mentioned previously, leaving any unused or unspent amounts of money on the grant could lead to deductions in scoring for future grant applications, and those unspent funds do not get returned back to the co-op program. Any payment requests must be submitted through Argo, the online system that we keep referring to, and no documentation will be accepted via email. And right now I'm going to pass out over to Daryl, and I'll be back with y'all later to show you the live demonstration.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daryl. I work for the audit fiscal team. I'm going to go through what's required when you submit your reimbursement as far as documentation is concerned. This includes receipts, invoices, personnel payments, proof of payment, lodging, travel. So we'll go through those. When submitting a reimbursement request, you got to provide two types of backup documentation. For every single expense incurred to prove the item was purchased, and that's depending on the expenditure. You'll need the receipt, the invoice, the work record, or otherwise known as the timesheet. And this year we've created a form for a stipend, which includes like if you have personnel that maybe works for one of your projects for just like the week and it's a one-time payment, you got to make sure that you provide the nature of work provided for the grant so we can approve that. We'll go through each type of additional information, and you can also check with your program guidance, or we are also here for your help. So submitting this documentation, one of the first types is the receipt. We require a photocopy of the receipt, and we would request that when you make the scan of the receipt, that the full copy of the receipt is made. Sometimes you maybe zoom in a little bit too much, and there's certain fields that are cut off, like the date of the purchase or the itemized list on the receipt, we're going to need like a full breakdown of that receipt in order to process your reimbursement. So a photocopy of the receipt should be provided with your backup documentation. Each receipt must contain at a minimum the date of purchase, vendor name, itemized list of purchases, and then the receipts must be legible for review. So if it's torn or missing or the ink is faded, you may not be able to be reimbursed for that expense. And for some reason, you know, accidents do happen. You can always call and check with myself, Marcy, Michael, Carly, Jessica, and we can go from there. Because this is a government grant program, sales tax is not eligible for reimbursement. And we see this occasionally, but when you're purchasing merchandise or you're at a restaurant, you got to make sure that, you know, if you're nonprofit, that you don't owe that sales tax. And if it is included, make sure that it's not included on your reimbursement, because we will disallow that. And sales tax is the most common reason for disallowances for reimbursements. So make sure you exclude that. Finally, all items must be itemized on the receipt so we can confirm that each purchase that is requested is on that receipt. The state's cost principles are followed for all expenditures. As a summary, the cost must be necessary and reasonable, be allowable as described in the grant agreement, and must be allocable to particular cost objective. For a full description of cost principles, refer to the program guidance document or the Texas Grant Management Standards description of cost principles. Next, we're going to go through an invoice. So this can be created in Word, or the invoice can be submitted from whoever you use. Payments for the independent contractor require an invoice. Common contractors for co-op grants include guides that maybe assist with your events, contract staff, and so on. Invoices must include the amount paid to the contractor, a description of the service provided, the data. The data must include the amount paid to the contractor, a description of the service provided and the services rendered, and the taxpayer identification number. For individuals, the taxpayer identification number would be their social. Like other transactions, proof of payment is required. If invoices are new to your organization and you're looking for an example, you can contact our staff to obtain a template. The one shown here is a good example of a contractor invoice. There's other parts of the grant where when you're paying personnel, this is a template that you guys can create, or we can also provide. The weekly work record includes the criteria that we look for. So they must include the employee name, the hours worked, the hourly pay rate, the total pay, any fringe benefits that your organization provides. There's a box for that amount, and then it also needs to be signed by an authorized supervisor. And a lot of the times we will send these back if the nature of work for that personnel is not filled out. So we need a breakdown of the services provided and the nature of work that employee provided for your grant. So that can be anywhere from, you know, did the camp, provided guide services, you know, drove the group to what state park. You know, we just need a little description of what that person was doing in order to get paid. And the hours worked, that needs to be broken down. The hours that they provided per day, and then of course their hourly rate, and then the total. Let's see. I think I included everything. Timesheets are a new requirement for their employees. You're not, like I said, you're not required to use our template, but as long as you provide all that information, then that is fine. This form is newly created, so this would be for, like I said, an employee that just provided like maybe a day or a weekend of a group outing. You can see that the check would be payable to the person working, their address, the dates requested, the amount of hours that they provided, the total amount that you're paying him, and then of course the description of work performed. That would be the nature of work. That needs to be signed by the person issuing that check and also the project officer. In addition to providing the receipt, invoice, or work record, the second part of required documentation is proof of payment for that expenditure. So not only do we need the receipt, but we also need the proof of payment. So whether you used a procurement card, a check, bank statement, something that shows that that receipt or invoice or timesheet was also paid for. The proof of payment may vary depending on the form of payment used. This information is detailed further in the program guidance document. The following proof is required for each transaction. Like I said, a check. This can be a digital check copy from the bank showing the amount paid. A copy of a non-canceled check with the bank statement showing the check cleared that account. P-card, debit or credit cards, a copy of the statement showing the charges. If paid with a credit card, you'll need a copy of the canceled check paid to the credit card company showing you paid the charges at the end of the month. I will say, if organization, if for some reason you use a personal credit card or you pay out of your own funds, you may send your personal bank card invoice and redact any personal information, you know, where you went to the grocery store, what other payments you have. You can also redact that and just show the amount of payments that you had for that grant. Those will also be accepted. Petty cash or gift cards are allowed, but not are recommended as they can be more complicated. Itemization for cash being withdrawn from petty cash is required, as well as a digital check copy showing the funds have been replenished. It is important to know that your organization received donated gift cards. The expenses purchased with those gift cards are not eligible for reimbursement to avoid potential double dipping of funds. Paying with personal funds. Employees and volunteers may purchase items with their personal funds and be reimbursed for those expenses. To ensure everything is routed through the awarded entity, the grant sponsor must pay those individuals first. Seek reimbursement from TPWD for those expenses. The documentation required would be the copy of the receipt or invoice and the proof of payment from organization to staff for expenditures. The next would be lodging. So if lodging from a hotel or camp facility is listed on the approved budget, you may seek payment for those expenses. Receipts must include the date of the stay, the nightly rate, the number of rooms used each night, hotel location, contact information, and must show a zero balance on the receipt or some type of proof of payment. Unlike other expenditures, hotel and local tax is allowable for hotels since these are typically not waived with tax exempt forms. Lodging such as Airbnb or VRBO is allowed. However, the information listed here still must be on the receipt, plus the rates of the lodging must be considered reasonable. For traveling, if listed on the approved budget, your organization may seek payment for travel expenses. Rental vehicles, bus transportation, gas, and mileage payments are all allowed as long as they are listed on the approved budget. Keep in mind that you may not claim both gas and mileage for the same travel, as this would be considered double dipping for the same expense. TPWD uses the current federal mileage rate when reimbursing for mileage, which can change on an annual basis. You can find the current federal mileage rate on the IRS website. To receive payment for mileage, a mileage log is required, which includes the name of the traveler, date of activity, number of miles driven per day, and the relevant grant-related activities and the starting and ending points. Next, I'm going to pass it back over to Michael, and he is going to go through submitting a payment request.
All right, thank you, Daryl. All right, so as mentioned previously, so in order to submit your reimbursement request or your advances, you're going to log into our online system, which is our Rec Grants Online, as you can see on my screen right here. And all you need to do whenever you log in is, okay, so you log in, and then once you hit your home page, you'll see my inbox, my tasks, and all this. And the best way to find your grant to submit for a request for payment is go to the applications tab right here, and then leave these fields blank, and you'll hit search. And you'll see these projects come up, and there's multiple for my project because this is a, this is an account we just made, a proxy account just to make for this this workshop. But you'll see active project, and then you'll see your fund number over here. And since you're a co-op, you'll always begin with the 52 hyphen, and then whatever your project number is. You click the name of your organization right here, and then you'll see this screen. And then all you have to do is hover over related documents and messages, and you'll select initiate a payment request. Once this is selected, a new task will appear as such, and then you just click it. And this is the main reimbursement request, the reimbursement request page. As you can see, it has your name of your entity, your address, your project ID, and all this stuff. And this is what I was talking about earlier about having your fiscal person up to date. You always want to make sure whoever's covering the mailbox is listed here, because those, like I said earlier, those correspondences will be sent to that person, and you'll have to know, if you want to know what's going on, you have to have that person updated or have that person checking regularly for any messages. And as also you can see how much the rest of this information auto-populates. So then further down, you'll see the built-in spreadsheet where the bulk information is provided. You must complete a line item for each receipt, invoice, or work record being requested. So for example, if you have a receipt that has various camping and fishing supply items listed, you don't need to enter a line item for each individual expense, just the total of your receipt invoice for one line item. Only thing that we ask is if there are any purchases made on the same receipt that are not part of your approved budget, please identify which items are not being requested for reimbursement. Make sure to include any activity dates that will be used, the vendor name, date of purchase, invoice number, type of payment, and the payment reference number provided. And that's usually like a check number or like a credit card number or a credit card authorization number. And then you'll include the specific category for that item that was listed on the approved budget, such as personnel, food, travel, etc. Then you'll include the requested dollar amount for each expense right here under the requested amounts. This portion could take, and then reviewing this portion could take a while depending if you have multiple items and also if you have all the documentation completed. And also, as you do this, I would recommend, very often that you hit save, because this system will time out and you will lose anything that you've been working on if you don't do it, I believe, every 10 minutes. So as you input these, and if you take breaks in between, save, save, save. And then after that, you'll need to upload the required backup documentation. And as mentioned before, this includes the invoices, receipts, work records, as pretty much everything that Daryl touched on in the previous slides. And you can only upload all this information into one PDF. So the best way to do this is to merge all your receipts, all your documentation into one PDF and merge it all into one PDF and upload it that way. And to speed up the review, it's highly recommended that you list all your documentation in the order that's listed in the spreadsheet right here, in the built-in spreadsheet. And then lastly, once all sections of the forms are complete, you're going to save again, and then you're going to hover over here where it says status change, and then hit the status change of payment reimbursement submitted. And that's when it'll tell us that a new reimbursement has come through. What's that?
It's because you have errors.
Oh, yeah. And then these errors come up just because I didn't fill out the rest of the form. So once you fill the form out, this error message won't appear. But also keep in mind, oh, yeah. And then you go to, you could also see that same reimbursement under My Task after you initiate it through the Applications tab that I showed you. And then you can see right here, you can see payment reimbursement in process. So this is the one that we started. And here it is again. And you just make sure to fill it out. And also, it's also worth noting, you will not be able to submit another request while this one is pending, and you will not, and the system won't allow you, because if I try to do another one right here, it's going to say it's an error because there's one already existing. So make sure that this one's all full and complete before you submit it. Otherwise, we'll be kicking it back to you for additional info. Okay. So now, yeah.
Hey, everybody. Blake Powers, systems analyst. I talk to a lot of you all the time. Just want to know that's a lot of information to process. This is a very handy technical guide here in the awarded active project resources for reimbursement requests. Please review this guide. It will not tell you all the programmatic information that you're getting today, but if you're losing any of this and you don't pick it up on the recorded webinar, this guide has screenshots. It walks you through the advanced process. It tells you when you can expect to get notifications back. Very helpful to understand what the sequence of the payment will look like for you as it progresses. Just past the submission, there's a lot more to it. So just reminding everybody that guide is there and available as a resource all the time, and we keep it updated.
Thank you, Blake. And also, I'll just go straight into the next thing. So if you want to submit in advance, it's the same process how I just showed you for submitting a reimbursement. You go to applications, you do the search, and except this time, whenever you put your, when you submit your reimbursement request, you go in there like you were doing like a normal one, and all you have to do is you initiate this. Sorry about that. And then you'll submit. You'll put down here advance for activity line item. You'll put that it's a advance payment request or seed money. Either or is fine. We'll know what you're talking about if you put it in here. And then you put the requested amount of the 3 months of expenses here, and then you just do the same thing. You status change and submit. And that's essentially the same. It's the same process as a regular reimbursement, except whenever you have your documentation, you're going to put the documentation after the fact, as opposed to the beginning of the process, as you would a normal regular reimbursement. And as I said before, make sure you submit a little bit extra than your seed is, and just to take into account any of disallowments that are made, and if any additional funds that are still within the scope of the budget can be requested on the next reimbursement, as long as the original seed is satisfied, the request for that is satisfied. Oh, so then after you say you do all that, you fill out, you put the advance request, and then you request it for, let's say, $5,000. So then after that, you'll go back to the home page, and then under Argo 2020 resources, like kind of how Blake showed you earlier, you're going to go down to the co-op program right here, number 2, and you will find the advanced form. There you go. Agreement for advance request form. And it's just a one-page document that looks like this. Is it up? Okay,
It downloads.
yeah,
It's at the bottom.
I got it. All right. And then this is the form that you'll attach as your backup documentation in Argo. So you just fill this out and you could type it in. You could type in the amount, the 5,000 right here, and then your organization name, and then you sign it either digitally or you print this out and download it and upload it. And then after you do that, you'll go back here, you'll upload documentation right here. And this would be, you see right here, it says agreement for advanced funds, the document we just uploaded. You hit save. And this would save normally if you had everything filled out. And then we'll process it. And that's pretty much it. And after that, once you receive your documentation, you'll go back into this later and upload all your supporting documentation to satisfy that seed requirement. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. And for terms of seed, that's the live demonstration portion of this. And I'll pass it on to Marcy. This one or this one? This one?
Thank you, Michael.
That's the browser. Oh. Screenshot.
Final payments. The final payment request is due no later than 45 days after the period of performance ends. If you have completed activities and purchases before then, you can submit the final reimbursement and final program report sooner to close the grant early. All expenses and grant-related activities must be completed during the period of performance. Anything falling outside of the grant period will be disallowed. If you have a large amount of funds remaining near the end of the grant period with no future activities planned, you may not purchase supplies to spend down remaining funds. While we encourage you to spend all funds available, all purchases must be tied to a grant-related activity within the period of performance. Supplies purchased solely for future post-grant period activities can't be linked to a grant-related activity and will be disallowed. Finally, please be aware of a records retention policy stated in the grant co-op program guidance document. You must retain all records relating to the performance of the grant, including supporting fiscal documents in case the project is selected for an audit. All records must be retained by your organization for 4 years after the grant expiration date or until all audit matters are resolved, whichever is later. Here are some helpful tips that pertain to grant expenditures and submitting a reimbursement request. We strongly encourage you to read the co-op program guidance. This guidance includes information on the administration of your grant. The REC grants online system times out, as Michael stated, so make sure that you are saving as you go so you won't lose any data entered, especially if you're preparing a large reimbursement request. When in doubt about purchasing a specific item, don't hesitate to contact grant staff. It's much better to know an item will be approved before the purchase is made rather than finding out it will be disallowed for reimbursement after the purchase. Make sure to list all required documentation before submitting the request. If documents are not complete, you will experience delays in receiving payment. It is highly encouraged to spend all grant funds available. If significant money is remaining towards the grant, a scoring deduction may be in place on future grant proposals. And finally, Here are the questions that come up the most. We get asked how to submit a reimbursement request. All reimbursement requests should be submitted through the Rec Grants online system. There is a step-by-step guide in the system, like Blake demonstrated a minute ago. You can find it under resources. Another reimbursement question we get is about the frequency of submitting a reimbursement request. While there is no deadline for submitting payment requests other than the final reimbursement, it is highly recommended to submit payment requests on a quarterly basis if items were purchased during that quarter. This is to ensure grant spending is on track throughout the grant's life cycle. Some grantees submit their reimbursements on a monthly basis. Smaller payment requests are also easier to review for auditors and can be processed quicker rather than a big request with 100+ items. And the top question is, how long does it take for a reimbursement request to get finalized and go to payment? The short answer is, it depends. If the reimbursement request is sent in with all the correct supporting documentation, then it should be paid relatively quickly. However, it may take up to 30 days. In closing, I encourage you to review the co-op program guidance and feel free to reach out to us with any questions as you prepare your reimbursement requests. Thank you very much. We will take any questions you have at this time.
All right, everyone. We're going to open it up now for some question and answer. So if you have any questions, we're going to keep everybody muted. I know this is a whole lot of information just thrown at you all at once. So if you have any questions now, go ahead and pop them into the questions box and we'll answer them. And as they come in, we'll also talk about them as they come in. So I can just let everybody know you don't have to keep checking that box. There are a few things that I noticed during the presentation that I just wanted to review. And there's some of our more frequently asked questions that I know that our audit team did cover. But some of the questions are if you are required to use our timesheet and mileage templates. The answer is no, you're not required to use the templates that we showed you in this presentation, but they are available as resources in case you need them. I know some of you are smaller organizations, you're not used to using state funds for your program, so you may not have some of those timesheets in place, but they are required for this grant. So those resources are available if you would like to use them, but you're not required to use them. You can find them in our co-op resources section of Argo. And if you're not using our forms, just keep in mind that you need to have the minimum level of information that we showed you on the slides in this presentation, and that's all also listed in the program guidance in your own timesheets that you submit. So just keep that in mind. Like Marcy just mentioned, another common question is how long does it take for payment? If all of the correct documentation was uploaded and received, it can take up to 30 days. And so we really want to stress that. If you're an organization that has smaller cash flow, so you may not have all of that funding up front, there is an advance payment option, but it can still take up to 30 days for you to receive that payment. So keep this in mind when you're planning all of your activities and the timeline of your activities. If you have a bunch of activities bunched up together at the beginning of the grant, keep in mind that you're going to need to request in advance for all of those, but it may take some time for you to receive that funding. So if you need to purchase those supplies and everything a month out before your event, just think about that timeline. We have a lot of different grant programs within the Rec Grants program, so co-op is not the only one. We have a limited amount of auditors reviewing these and a whole lot. We have thousands of grant projects within our department, so just keep that in mind. You may not be first in our queue to get reviewed once it's submitted, but we'll get to you as soon as you pop up in the queue. The other thing I wanted to mention, and we see this quite a bit during the life of a grant, so occasionally if this is your first time being set up as a vendor in the system, some of the payments may get sent as a check. This doesn't always happen, and we're not really sure why. This is above ours. It's accounts payable and the comptroller. But even if you set up a direct deposit account, that first payment may or may not be a check to the address that was listed with your AP 152 or direct deposit form. So just keep that in mind. We're not really sure why. We don't even know if that's a policy, but just keep in mind that your first one may be a check. So meaning that it could take a couple more days to get to you and it may not show up immediately. But then all payments after that, if you submitted your direct deposit form and it was set up, will be via direct deposit. So that's just something I wanted to mention. So let's go ahead and pop in your questions. And I wanted to open it up to see if there's some common questions out there. And I think Jessica has some common questions.
We have lots of questions about advances. Can you talk a little bit about how much money you can get as an advance?
Absolutely. I can start that out and then pass it over to our audit team if I'm missing anything, but we do not have a specific dollar amount cap on the amount you can receive in advance. However, we do have very specific guidelines, and these are related to state rules. So this is beyond our control for grant funds. You can request up to 3 months worth of estimated expenses in an advance. So each program is going to be completely different. If you're a project that needs to purchase the bulk of supplies listed on your approved budget right up front, and you're going to purchase those within a month of getting your advance, then you can request whatever dollar amount you need to purchase those expenses. Again, it has to be, it's not necessarily a dollar amount. It has to do with 3 months of receiving that advance. You can request that dollar amount. Again, other examples could be if you're a summer camp program and you're going to be expending all of those expenses within that summer, so you just need an advance, it might be 80 or 90% of your grant funds, but it's all about what the auditors refer to as the immediate needs for your project, which we define as 3 months worth of expenses. Are there any other common questions that we need to address in the question and answer?
We have another question about moving funds between approved budget line items. How would a grantee know if they need to submit a budget revision? Is it only if they're creating new line items?
Yes, the quick answer is yes. You only need a budget revision if you're adding new line items to the budget. If you have, let's say an example, a camping supply line item that has $2,000 listed there, and then fees for state parks that has $3,000 listed, and you actually need more money for those camping supplies and less money for those fees, you do not need a budget revision. You just go ahead and purchase those funds. We expect that when you wrote this grant and you did your approved budget, the actual expenses are going to be slightly off. So if you actually need to spend $5,000 for those camping supplies, and then you're only going to spend $500 for your fees to state parks, that is completely fine. You do not need a prior approval or a budget revision for that. However, if you wanted to add a new line item that is for rock climbing supplies that was not listed on your approved budget, that is when you need to do a budget revision request. So if you have any questions about this at all, please don't hesitate to contact Jessica or myself. This is a very common question we get, and we can walk you through. If you just let us know, hey, we want to do this, we'll let you know if you need to seek that budget revision or not.
Here we have a question for our fiscal team. Where can the form be found to provide banking documentation so we can have reimbursement direct deposited?
I can answer that. So if you have not already submitted a direct deposit form to us, then it's not a required thing. You don't have to have direct deposit. You can find the direct deposit form in the project elements section of Argo. So when you go to find your initial application and you do that blank search under the applications tab and you find your current application, at the very bottom of that forms menu, that's what we call it, you'll see a link that says Project Elements. And in that form, you will see whatever documents you provided before to us, but you'll see a specific line for direct deposit where we have the template for direct deposit. Just download that template, complete it fully. If you don't complete that full document, our accounts payable team will kick it back. And then you upload it in that same spot. And then we will receive notification once that is uploaded. And then we'll get it all set up. So just keep in mind that you'll want to do that before the payment request because it can take a few days to get it set up with accounts payable. So if you already have a payment that is in the final stages of review, it may not get set up in time for you to make that payment. So go ahead and complete those direct deposit forms now and submit them. Due to rules, government rules with emailing private information, it's not recommended that you email those documents to Jessica or myself. The Project Elements section of Argo is a much more secure way to provide those forms to us, so that's where it can be found. And I just want to clarify, there's a question on if you move funds between approved line items, you do not need to submit a budget revision. That is correct. So if you're just moving funds between approved line items on the budget, you do not need a budget revision request. You only need to do that request if it's for a line item that is not currently listed. Now, if you're moving like $50,000 to one line item, you just may want to ask us first. Usually that's fine. But if you're just moving a couple thousand here or there, it's really not a big deal. You do not need to do a budget revision. Is there any more questions coming up in the chat field?
Not right now, but we'll give everyone just a moment.
All right. Now is that time to answer any questions. The audit team, as well as Jessica and myself, will be available anytime after this. This is not like a foundation where we're like, oh, don't respond to us. We encourage you to reach out to us because we want to make sure you're in compliance and that you don't lose out on any funds because things are disallowed. So please reach out to us in the beginning. The last thing I wanted to clarify, because some of you who have already submitted your grant agreement may run into this, you do not need to submit your first quarterly report until I believe it's the July quarterly report. That will be when your first one is due. If you already have submitted your grant agreement and you've been moved into the active status, you may receive a notification on April 1st or the first couple days of April that a quarterly report is due. You can ignore those notifications. We're going to delete them, but due to the way our system works, it automatically generates, and then on April 4th, we'll go in and delete that. So if you do happen to receive that notification, just keep in mind that you do not have to do this very first April quarterly report. You've barely been active. So what you'll do is you'll submit all of your activities from the start of the grant period, which is March 1st, all the way until the end, which is June 30th, in your report that will be due in July. So that's one last thing I wanted to mention.
If I can. Kimberly had a question on timesheets. She has some in-house timesheet info that her PeopleSoft financial accounting system can produce. If the system can provide the same info that is in our or on our in-house forms, you can totally submit that in lieu of the timesheet and then submit the pay stub info. So you can do that in place of the timesheet forms.
And if you have a question on your own very specific timesheet, feel free to reach out to our auditors independently and send them an example of what your timesheet looks like, and they can tell you if that will be suitable for a personnel request. And all of those templates and everything can be found in our co-op resources. If you don't see anything listed there, just reach out to us. We may not have uploaded everything because we're creating new templates all the time. For example, we have a new template for if you have an intern or a stipend, and you want to see an example of that I don't believe has been created. So if you need to see any of those templates, feel free to reach out to our staff and we can provide those to you. All right, and are there any new questions that need to be answered?
If folks are sending out press releases or having media events, or would like to invite Rec Grant staff to their events, how does all that work?
Absolutely, thank you, Jessica. So if you have a media event or if you want to do a press release, by all means, that's encouraged. Jessica and myself love to get out in the field, so we highly encourage you, if you want, you don't have to invite us out because we'd love to come take a look at your project. We can always come out and do that. But if you would like a statement from TPWD or anything, please reach out to us and we'll put you in contact with our communications team, or we'll provide that statement depending on it. But if there are any of those other media events, and you would like anything from us, please reach out to us and we can provide that information. Again, if you're using our logo for anything, keep in mind that you must use the Proud Partner logo and get the design for that pre-approved by either Jessica or myself before you start printing it. You're not required to use logo, but you do need that pre-approval so we can ensure you're using the correct version. Those different file versions, they're in all sorts of different formats, can be found in the co-op resources section of Argo. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that, Jessica? Perfect.
Nope, I don't think so, except we do love photos. And if you are not following us on social media, please do, and feel free to tag us as well. You can find our social media links just by navigating to Facebook and typing in either recreation grants or co-op grants, and it should pull up fairly quickly.
Perfect. And with that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. If you have any questions, we will be available after this. This webinar will be recorded and will be available in the resources section probably next week at some time. It takes us a little while to pull that out and download it. But that will be available in the resources in the co-op resources section about next week. So if you have staff turnover or people who could not attend today, or if you just want a reminder of what was discussed, by all means, that will be available. Again, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. So with that point, I want to thank you all for attending the grant management workshop today. And I want to send you a very sincere congratulations. Texas Parks and Wildlife is so excited to work with each and every one of you. And there's a very competitive program and it's hard to get in. So we just want to congratulate each and every one of you on the amazing work that we're going to be supporting. So if you need anything, please let us know. And with that, have a great day. Thank you all very much.